Hello, everyone. I am Tim Phillips, President of Americans for Prosperity. Thank you for joining us for another one of these Facebook Live efforts, dialing in on the federal policy threats coming fast and furious out of Washington, D.C., from this administration and from this Speaker, Pelosi, and from the Senate Leader, Schumer. We're thrilled to have a member of Congress today, a dear friend and ally from the great state of Texas, my favorite state in the country, also home to the greatest football team. Obviously, I'm speaking of the Dallas Cowboys, so I think we can all agree on that. But to introduce him, Mac, go ahead from our great Texas team. Take it away with AFP.
Yes, I'm so grateful we could have a conversation today on federal policy. Grateful and really excited to have Congressman Pete Sessions, who represents the 17th District. He sits on science, technology, and oversight, but he's had a long career in Congress fighting for Texans, and we're grateful to have him back in Congress representing his hometown. So really excited for this conversation as we talk about H.R. 1 and infrastructure. Congressman, do you want to introduce a couple points?
Well, first thing I'd like to say is thank you. Thank you for paying attention for Americans for Prosperity. It actually is more than just the name of an organization. It actually has real meaning behind it, and that is our country, from the beginning of our births, has believed in American exceptionalism, America growing and getting better. And over the last, I'm 66, so over the last, let's call it 60 years, that I've been aware of my country and what we stood for. We were always a country that tried to do the right thing for the right reason. But one thing we always did was we were a country that would go create a better future for not just the people who live there, but the next generation. And so when I came to Congress in 1997 and actually found Americans for Prosperity, it meant something in the title. We have to have a group of people who not only understand economics, but who understand the free enterprise system, and who perhaps more than that understand the economic circumstances of a country. And that is what this organization does. It looks at not just spending and not just taxes and not just the availability of the free enterprise system, but more importantly, it looks at how our country is doing with the individuals also. The individuals need to do well in this country because they are the people who will employ not just small business, but millions of Americans through creative ideas that come from America, that come from intellectual property, that come from brand new companies being built, IPOs that abound with ideas of Americans. And so true reform, true growth, and job opportunity all work together to make sure that we have a bright future for our country. Last thing I'd like to add, and Mac he was reading the information. I serve on government reform and oversight also as a subcommittee or a ranking chairman on a very important subcommittee that is interested, among other things, in U.S. elections, FISA, and the border. And all these issues have come into play as we have seen the Democratic majority move themselves across lines and directly in front of the American people, where they are no longer the party of their grandfather, even the party of many of the members that were here. There's a change in Washington. And so if having effective members of Congress and you knowing what is happening in Washington has never been more important.
Yeah. Congressman Sessions, thank you for that very much. And given your work in the area of maintaining the integrity of elections, can you talk about this H.R. 1? It's called by an Orwellian name by the far left that is pushing it. I'm not even going to give it. It's basically the stripping away of free speech protections and the loss of localities and states to be able to run elections. But can you give us a sense of what is in this H.R. 1 that folks may have heard about, It was jammed through the House of Representatives on a straight party line vote. Am I right? They did not even allow committee hearings on this. Is that right, Congressman Sessions?
Well, in fact, Tim, as you suggest, this is a bill which went through last Congress also through the House of Representatives. It did not make it through the Senate, as we know, and we'll probably end up talking about it. But procedurally, not just that Republicans were in the majority last term, but procedurally with cloture, it did not stand a chance really to have the light of day in the Senate. We hope that is still the way it is now, but let's go to the substance of this. In fact, increasingly, the left has understood that their control of elections is the most important thing that they wish to do. And theirs is a broad array of not just ideas, but really of laws that they would wish to change. And the largest one is, in my opinion, is this H.R. 1. H.R. 1 is a bill that essentially changes federalism as we know it. It changes federalism because instead of there being this equal balance between Article 1, which is the legislative branch, Article 2, which is the administrative branch, and Article 3, which is the judicial branch. Then you go on further down and you realize the 10th Amendment. And the 10th Amendment is there to everything that is not given as a stated role of the federal government is reserved for the states. Well, part of that is reserved for the states is their responsibility to run their own elections. They also have a responsibility, in my opinion, which is challenged and was challenged this last year, that said they have a responsibility to have rules and laws by which they conduct themselves that are very much, and I admit this, in the federal purview because of activists in Washington. But by and large, it is up to a state to conform themselves to their election laws. This H.R. 1 would move all responsibility to the federal government. It would move it to essentially the Article 2 powers. It would be run out of Washington, D.C. The election laws would be determined by Congress, would then be administered by Article 2. And then, as an addition to this, they then want to add more Supreme Court justices. 4 Supreme Court justices. They've already announced this as part of their plan to make sure that the legislative intent or things that are passed are completely agreed to by what would then be not an equal, but then Supreme Court. So the things that are in H.R. 1 are most disturbing. Besides moving the decision-making to Washington, D.C., it makes public funds with federal fines on corporation. It moves the responsibilities necessarily away from a balance that we understand today. Today, there are PACs which are made up of employees for these corporations. It outlaws essentially PACs. It outlaws the process by which they do today because they refer to it as a corporate contribution. Well, it's kind of nebulous about how they say this. They want to continue PACs that are union related, almost without restrictions, but they come in and place an enormous burden on PACs, employee PACs. Next, it does bring directly to bear money that the federal government would then, if a candidate collects money, and that's what we do, for every dollar that they collect, $6 would be given by the federal government. So it means that the federal government becomes a player in every single congressional race. Now, you and I could figure out of our own opinion of what we think that impact would be, but the bottom line is the federal government is then intruding within the political systems of our parties, which I am against. It goes on and on and on, and describes in particular how elections will be held, about how voter verification, same-day voting, all the things that have been a part of a balance of a state government for the integrity of their system are done away with. So what I would say to you, Tim, is it is a very important point to understand. If anyone would like information on this, it's on my website, sessions.house.gov. I encourage us to know specifically the issues and the ideas, because as we argue with our friends on the left, it's important to know what they are attempting to do, and that is to own and control the ballot box, and was followed up lastly by President Biden himself, who said he would not be surprised if there was not a Republican Party in the future. And when we get away and go to one party system or one party control, comrade, this country is in trouble. We actually need each other. We need the Democrats. We need the Republicans. We need this as a counterbalance to make America great. But they're trying to follow the same types of processes that we know in Russia, Cuba, Venezuela, and China.
Well, Congressman, that's a really interesting take on HR 1. You know, as we're a activist group with grassroots, what does this mean for constituents here in Texas? You know, we talk about privacy at the ballot. Now it seems that they're trying to make everyday Texans be transparent to the government and not have that privacy respected in terms of what they support and the organizations that they're part of.
Mac, as you're aware, this last election cycle, and part of this is within my purview as on the Government Reform Committee, we became aware of a number of initiatives that were initiated across the country, which I disagree with, but that I need to acknowledge happened. And it was as a result of COVID. It was as a result of what I clearly do understand and know was a plan out of Washington, D.C., by the think tanks and the DNC, Democrat National Committee. And there were a series of changes that they adopted, asking states, recognizing that states were responsible for this. They went to Democratic governors and Republican governors in some cases and asked that they make changes in order to conform their state to the way they saw the COVID experience. One of these was they came up with drop boxes, not lock boxes, but drop boxes. They came up with the ability that people would be able to get their ballot, not by requesting that ballot, but that they were trying to get in these states every single person to be mailed a ballot, whether they requested one or not, whether they knew that they had passed away or not, or whether they knew they had moved. And they went back to the federal law of motor voter, whereby for 2 full federal elections, people need to stay on that ballot. They mailed these ballots out. They made it very clear that you could put them in a drop box, not a lock box. And we saw circumstances across the country that were also very consistent, whereby there were lawsuits in almost every single state in these jurisdictions, where what they were after was to say that the voting laws of those states were discriminatory, and they attacked the very heart of these many times with 6 weeks before the election, even after ballots had been printed. And what they achieved through this was several states, including at least one Republican state, that consented to not verify signatures based upon mail-in ballots. And one of the important parts of the integrity of the system of voting has been that a person needs to request to be a voter. They need to fill out documentation, including their full name, their age, their address where they live, and some identifying source of identification like a passport or a driver's license to assure that they were the correct person. And so what happened is, and a signature to that. And so what happened is that across the board, these states went and then said, okay, we will not check the ballot signature to ensure it complies on a one-to-one basis. And that opened up the doors. So between mailing out ballots, whether people request them or not, whether they were going to check the signatures, and lastly, and then on the backside, I believe that federal authorities were very lethargic in understanding the gamemanship that happened, anomalies that occurred, and as they were happening across the country, keeping tabs of it and knowing what that effect would be.
Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen watching, as you've listened to Congressman Sessions and Mac Morris from our AFP Texas team talk about this HR1, which will take away the ability of your state, your district, your area to run its own elections. They'll give it to Washington, D.C. They'll basically be following the California model, free speech protections lost. If you want to raise your voice against this terrible piece of legislation, click the I Volunteer link right there on this Facebook Live. Just click on that I Volunteer link. It takes maybe a minute or so. You can make your voice heard on this issue to both of your U.S. senators. This will be coming before the Senate in the near future. We want to make sure that it doesn't pass. It was jammed through, as Congressman Sessions and I were talking about. It was jammed through on a straight partisan line vote, not even any committee hearings in the House, but make your voice heard. It'll take literally about a minute and a half of your time, but it matters at a moment like this for our country and for your rights and freedoms to make your voice heard. So click on that link, the I Volunteer link, and make your voice heard to your two United States senators. Congressman Sessions, if we could switch direction for a moment to this next tax and spend bill that the Biden administration is now pushing. I guess really it's two spending bills totaling around $4 trillion. They're trying to call one of them an infrastructure bill. But can you give us a sense of what's in that legislation, why it's a bad idea, and where it stands?
Yes, I will. And by the way, there is a very interesting podcast. I think it's April 4th by the New York Times. And they actually get in and describe it to their comrades about what their mission is and what they're trying to accomplish. And the interesting part about this is that of the some $4 trillion, only about 7% of this is for actually building roads and bridges to the infrastructure. It is a massive undertaking of rebuilding cities where people, larger cities, and trying to take what they call institutional discrimination, where people who might have lived in a downtown area, who might have had their homes or might have been moved as a result of perhaps highway construction, other issues, they're calling this institutional lifetime racism, and they are going to come and put trillions of dollars and give them to people. They're going to buy their homes for them. They're going to put them in places. So it's a relocation more than it is actually an infrastructure bill. They are going to come and give hundreds of billions of dollars that they've already done. Some $400 billion has already now gone to blue cities in particular before now. And that's why some of these cities and states are flush with cash right now. They are not going to pay have this where people have a living wage. They're going to give this to people for not working. They're going to give them a regular wage. And so they've given an incredible amount of money to these cities. These cities are going to find themselves where they no longer need commerce that is in those cities. They no longer need the big manufacturer. They no longer care about the thing that is in their town that provided that town with the basis of their economic support. They are going to use the federal government. So this is more than just an experiment, as the New York Times talks about. This is a reality. And the reason why is because the federal government can print money. Well, that's the way it looks like until we found out earlier this week, inflation's raising its ugly head. And so, as you may know, on the front of the Wall Street Journal this last week, we had a 1 month rise that was one of the highest raises in cost of goods across this country, not just energy and not just furniture and not just healthcare, but across the board. And all this has happened because prices have risen because of the president's economic policy of, in addition to unemployment by states, the federal government is giving $300 a week more to people to stay unemployed, to compete against them coming back to work. And so you have seen we're really the first time in several years, the U.S. Chamber now is saying, hold on, we disagree with that. It's one thing to help people in the face of COVID. It's another thing to face it when we have come out of the COVID experience and jettisoned that as a result of the vaccines that are available. It's time to go back to work. So, Tim, what you're talking about is all mixed in together, and that is their 100-day agenda. Their 100-day agenda is meant to replace what we know is not just the free enterprise system, but it is the basic elements of what we have for economics in this country and replace it with government spending.
Well, Congressman, you have a rural district. A lot of parts of the district are rural. This spending bill is really not taking care of roads and bridges. What does all this spending really mean for folks who live in Waco or outside of town? How does that really affect them?
Well, the effect is going to be not only on, and the president is trying to, quote, negotiate, but the first words out of their mouth is tax increase, change the formulas that we've been using for several years for not just death tax and inheritance, but really the basis of all of that is small business. As you know, Max, small business many times are handed down through generations of families. And the what is called the basis point by which when a person gets that, well, someone's grandfather may have started a company, and that may be tens of millions of dollars, not unusual in today's terms. And they want you to go back and have a basis point of when you started, when it was $50. And they want to prove that the entire capital gain off that, which is the asset by which a person is then transferring with a basis of the death tax, they want Uncle Sam to get a huge part of that money. Well, what it does is it destroys the small business, because the small business or large business, but doubtful unless it's in a corporation, it means that they've got to sell that small business or large pieces of that to pay the death tax. We find it in particular, and you mentioned this, Mac, and you're right on, many people that are in agriculture are cash poor, land rich. We are finding that as more and more people are moving not only to Colorado, Nevada, Texas, that the price of land is exponentially increasing. And so where you find areas outside of Waco, Texas, outside of Dallas, Texas, outside of Austin, Texas, where some of the best black dirt is that we use for growing is now close to those areas that are heavy growth. And now the IRS, upon the death, is saying, we want money not for agriculture value. We want it for the value if they came and put 5,000 or 2,000 houses in that 200 acres that you've got there. And it changes the dynamics. And so they are forcing people to have to settle where the IRS decides the value of the property so that uncle can get their money. It is a terribly destructive, onerous demand by the federal government. And this comes about as a result of tax policy that the Democrats want to change. I don't argue that there are always tools available to a new majority to change some tax policy, but this is done to punish agriculture, small business, and communities in favor of growing the size of a vastly larger, not just bureaucracy, but expensive government. And we have to know that as Republicans, as conservatives, we are for people to do well, not for this government to have such an advantage that they drive the marketplace. And there has to be that balance. Well, that's what we've attempted to do. And this is why we're going to have to say that what this plan and policy is detrimental to the American way of fairness and freedom, but mostly to an individual family. We've been through this for years with Waters of America. We've been through this with endangered species, and we've seen things come and go. I actually, Tim and Mac, am for a tighter deciding value between our parties to where there's less movement and to where we can build real, true, have growth and opportunity. But what happens is we swing from one side to the other on a regular basis. And that is hard for people as they're trying to be competitive with the world.
Well said. Congressman Pete Sessions from Texas, Mac Morris from our AFP Texas team. I'm Tim Phillips, and ladies and gentlemen, it's a big moment for the country. So much going on in Washington, D.C. Unfortunately, as we've been detailing here with Congressman Sessions, a lot of it not good. Policies are going to be harmful to your freedom, your prosperity, our nation's freedom and prosperity. Make your voice heard at this moment, whether it's on this tax and spend bill they're trying to call the infrastructure bill to stop that, or this HR 1, which will have a control over elections going to Washington, D.C., being pulled out of your home area, your local area and state. Make your voice heard. Click on that I Volunteer link. Take action now. Thank you for all you're doing and for watching us today, and we will see you in the near future.